Today we are going to discuss about the concept called national literature. So we'll start with a question. Is literature related to the national boundaries, and is there any way where one can think of literature primarily to be national, or is it that thinking of literature from the point of view of a nation is very chauvinistic? To answer this question, we'll look into the quotation stated by Frederick Jameson. All third world literatures are national allegories. They talk in terms of building their own nation. When the third world countries encountered the term for the first time, they thought of making themselves as a nation. It does not mean that they were not a nation before the advent of the European colonial powers. But we know that kingdoms were ruled by one ruler after the other, and sometimes by many, ever expanding and decreasing size of the kingdom depending on the ability of the ruler ruling. Even before British rule, we had a notion of a country which was sacrosanct, and therefore to discredit the nationalistic belief will be altogether not right. Notion of nation is not just a European import. Nation, in the broader sense of the term, signified the consciousness that was already prevalent in India. Now we'll discuss about the contradictory features of the nativist versus internationalists. Nativists champion the local, the regional, based on the language. G. N. Davies says nativism is a language-specific way of looking at literature, whereas internationalists believe that the Western parameters of looking at literature, history, culture, and society are the only valid. Some internationalists believe in pan-human existence or post-national existence. Now we are going to discuss about the concept of internationalism from three different perspectives. The first is Jawaharlal Nehru's view of internationalism based on his political values. Next is Gandhi's view of internationalism based on his humanitarian aspects. And the next is Tagore's view of internationalism from spiritual perspective. And the last we are going to discuss about Arjun Appadurai's post-nationalism, which arises out of the crisis of the nation state. First, let us discuss about the concept of nativism. Nativism is a critical project that understands writing as a social act and expects of it an ethical sense of commitment to the society within which it is born, as said by Ganesh N. Devi. The main agenda of nativism is the indigenous cultural self-respect, and it cries for the autonomy of Indian culture and literature. It rejects the superiority of the Western culture and rules out the colonial standard of literary history as a series of epochs. And it also rules out the Marga claim of mainstream Sanskrit and Tamil traditions of literature and critical theories which dominated the Indian literary scenario prior to the emergence of Bhasha literatures in the 11th century. The two ways of looking at Indian literature are our encounter with the colonial West has made many people to equate modernity with westernization. It also says that the single shelf of good European library is worth the whole of native literature of India and Arabia. Whereas the Orientalists thought that India had a rich, glorious past which we have forgotten, and it needs the Western people to reinvent our glorious tradition. G. N. Devi in After Amnesia mentions that we have forgotten Bhasha literary theory, and he uses the term cultural amnesia to refer to it. But he is quite optimistic, believing that what would come after amnesia is nativist history. He points out to the contemporary Indian scholars the path in which their intellect could pursue for the benefit of our society and culture. In the present context of globalization, when the Euro-American theories are profoundly dominating the Indian academy, regional literatures are neglected. So nativists call for cultural self-respect as it is essential for the decolonization of the Indian mind. Now we'll discuss about the ambiguities in nativism. What does the word native or Desi mean? Desi can be translated as regional, country, or even national. Native and nation have a common Latin origin from the word nasi, meaning to born. The next problem is that nativists have not identified who the non-native or the outsider or the alien is. So it deals with the polarity native versus internationalism. Initially, we'll discuss about Nehru's concept of Indian nationalism. We do not wish to be isolated. We wish to have the closest contacts because we do, from the beginning, firmly believe in the world coming closer together and ultimately realizing the ideal of what is called one world. Nativist is of opinion that we cannot be truly international by following the West. It is the West who will carry on with their dominance. Though the colonial rule has ended, West dominates literature, science, technology, economy, and culture. So Nehru does not seem to have understood that India is a part of Asia and not Europe. So the nativist calls Nehru's concept of internationalism as bogus. It's an idealized version because till the time we reach a state of perfection, it's impossible. Next, we'll discuss about Gandhi's concept of internationalism. You can be a true international if you're true regional or true national. So this is the main concept of Gandhi's internationalism. Without being nationalist, none can lay claim to internationalism. Unless a man cannot serve his family, his village, his country, he cannot serve the world. So he does not try to imitate the West. Instead, he celebrates the local one, and in the way of celebrating the local, he can be a truly international. There is no harm in becoming international or getting international recognition as long as you are respecting what is yours. What is the law or code of your land? Internationalism has got no malice, no ill will or contempt, but it had not only peace and goodwill in it. And unless a man can begin to love heartily his neighbors, he cannot cultivate the spirit of love for the outside world. Being national does not in itself deny the possibility of being international. But if we start off wanting to be international by imitating the West and are talking about globalization, they are not the true internationalists. But in the process of becoming internationalists, they are getting denationalized. So certain scholars question that there is no future in academics if one wants to be regional. Being nativist is narrowness. A great writer writes primarily for his own time and for his own community. If at all any international recognition comes, it is purely incidental or secondary. There are different claims charged against nativism. Nativists are also becoming Western as it is the construct of the West. Prior to the colonialism, kingdoms and empires collided and expanded at the expense of each other. Nativists have to accept what has happened to India during the colonial era. They cannot think of going back to the era of Rajatwa. The colonial hegemony of discourse has made an India nation state. West practices violent nationalism, leading to imperialism. Gandhi said violent nationalism, otherwise known as imperialism, is a curse. Non-violent nationalism is a necessary condition of corporate or civilized life. Many extremists fighting for Indian independence believed in the Western form of violent nationalism, but Gandhi was against it. Instead, he practiced non-violent humanitarian nationalism, and this came into existence. Instead of imitating the Western sense of nationalism and nation state, our nationalism is own product and has its own life. Our nationalism is not only for India but for the whole world. Gandhi said, Indian nationalism has, I hope, struck a different path. It wants to organize itself or to find full self-expression for the benefits and service of humanity at large. National, not in the Western sense of the term, but in the Indian sense. It is an anti-colonial project, perfect anti-colonial internationalist project. A nativist movement can easily go chauvinistic. The aim is to exclude, to restrict, to whip up an anti-feeling which ordinarily is a part of the power game. Nativism practiced in its narrow sense can really be chauvinistic and violent and thereby fail in its project. It can be anti-colonial, but when it becomes a closed one and stops all communication with other cultures, the Indian civilization will be dead. Nativism can be practiced by not obstructing any outside influence. Dilip Chetri, in the afterword of his collection of poems, The Mountains, complains, my own Marathi citizenship and status as a poet is of no use to me when, as a bilingual poet writing in English, the nativists cast apprehensions on my nativity. Balchandra Nemade, in Nativism Literature, wrote, culture is a network of interacting systems. Every living and potent culture has the inbuilt capacity to convert and absorb all external influences into a native system. The process of such assimilation may be termed as nativization. It is against G. N. Davis' unnecessary formulation of hegemonic mark over the Bhasha. It also brings out the nativist awareness, a broader one to counter the Western hegemony. Now let us discuss about W. H. Hudson's view of national literature. According to him, an author must be studied based on his or her tradition. A nation's literature is not a miscellaneous collection of books which happen to have written in the same tongue or within a certain geographical area. It is a progressive revelation, age by age, of such nation's mind and character.